on the evening of December 24th, 2001. 48-year-old Kevin Butler was at his home in the Pleasant Grove neighborhood of southeast Dallas, getting ready to head out for Christmas Eve dinner with his best friend, Michael DiNardo. What Kevin didn't know was that two men had spent most of that afternoon drinking in their front yard a block behind his house and were planning to come over that night for reasons that had nothing to do with Christmas. Butler lived alone in his house and ran a local swimming pool company out of the area. According to his sister Kathy, he took in stray cats and dogs and treated them with love. The one he was closest to was an 18-inch white-crested cockatoo Kevin had taken in 2 years earlier from a roommate who'd have to move and couldn't bring him along. Kevin named him Bird. From people who knew their relationship, they knew one thing about Bird: he didn't take kindly to strangers. Back at the restaurant, after waiting for an hour, Michael DiNardo started to worry about his friend. Kevin wasn't picking up the phone, and that wasn't like him. After several calls went to voicemail, Michael decided to drive to his house to check up on him. But when he pulled up into the driveway, it was clear something was wrong. The front door of the house was wide open, and even though it was late at night, the lights inside the house were still on. Looking around, Michael also noticed that Kevin's pickup truck, the one he used to park in the driveway, was gone. Fearing something terrible had happened to his friend, Michael called 911. When officers from the Dallas Police Department arrived, they found the house ransacked. Items were scattered across the floor, drawers were pulled out, and furniture was overturned. Everything in that house felt like a fight had taken place. That feeling would be confirmed the moment they entered the living room. Kevin Butler lay in the middle of the floor with his arms and legs bound with electrical cord. His shirt was soaked through with blood as multiple stab wounds marked his chest and abdomen. There were bruises across his upper body from a beating, and his throat had been slashed. Whoever had done this hadn't been in a hurry. They had taken their time. But what the officers found next was even more bizarre. Looking through the rest of the house, officers walked into the kitchen where they found Bird lying on the floor near the back wall. He was missing a leg, his wings were broken, and there was a small pool of blood underneath him. A later forensic examination would confirm that he had been killed by a stab wound to the back. But there was one thing about the scene that caught the officers' attention even in all of this. The cockatoo's beak and claws were covered in blood. Police took both bodies to the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office and examined the rest of the house. In the living room, on a light switch a few feet from where the attack had taken place, they found another smear of blood. The same kind of blood was on the handles of 2 of the 4 knives recovered from the scene. But after forensic testing, it would later come to light that none of the blood at the scene had come from Kevin or Bird. Whoever had walked into Kevin's house that night had walked out of it bleeding. By now, police had DNA from 4 separate locations inside the house, but they had no name to match it to yet. The lead investigator, Detective Brett Malden, began working through Butler's co-workers, neighbors, and anyone who had a reason to have been around that house. And it didn't take long for a name to surface. Several people Butler worked with told police about a former employee he'd recently fired and had a public falling out with. That employee was 22-year-old Johnny Cerna, and he lived a block behind Butler's house with his 30-year-old half-brother, Daniel Torres. Cerna had worked for Butler's pool company for some time. The exact length isn't on the public record, but it was long enough that Butler had come to trust him with company money. One day he was given a payment to cover an above-ground pool liner, but somewhere between Butler writing it out and the bank processing it, Cerna altered the check. When Butler found out, he fired Cerna on the spot, and in just a few months, what had started as a workplace dispute had turned into something else entirely. Malden brought them in for questioning a few days into the investigation. Both denied being anywhere near Butler's house that night. For now, he had nothing to hold them on. But before sending them home, Malden took their cheek swabs. If they'd bled inside Butler's house, the lab would confirm it. On paper, Cerna was the obvious lead. He was a fired employee with a fresh grudge against Butler, living less than 100 yards from the house where Butler had been killed. So all that was left now was to wait for the DNA results to put Cerna into that house. But this would prove to be more difficult. DNA testing in 2002 was still relatively new in everyday casework, and the Dallas County Crime Lab was running months behind on its caseload. When the results finally came back in July of 2002, it had been 7 months, and they weren't what Malden had expected.
The blood on the light switch, the 2 knife handles, bird's beak, and the fingerprints lifted from inside the house. None of it belonged to Cerna. All of it traced back to his 30-year-old half-brother, Daniel Torres. Faced with the DNA evidence, Torres still denied being anywhere near Butler's house that night. He waived his Miranda rights states and signed a written statement saying he had no idea how his blood had gotten inside. But Malden didn't believe his story. A few days later, Torres signed a second statement, this time admitting he had been inside Butler's house on Christmas Eve, but he hadn't touched him. In his version of events, he and Cerna had been drinking in their front yard when Butler drove by and flipped them off. Cerna had said he wanted Butler to pay. Sometime later, Torres noticed Cerna had left, so he walked over to Butler's house to check on his half-brother. By the time he got there, Cerna already had Butler on the floor and was stomping on him with a knife.
Torres claimed he tried to wrestle the knife away and cut his hand doing it, so he panicked, grabbed Butler's truck keys, and took off. According to him, Butler was tied up on the floor and still alive when he left. He also said that during the struggle, the bird had come at him off the porch and pecked at him, in his own words, all over my head, and that he grabbed a fork and stabbed at it to make it stop. It explained everything in the kitchen, the injuries the bird suffered, and the trail of feathers running across the house. Confronted with his half-brother's evidence, Cerna eventually broke as well. He told Malden that Daniel had been the one to slash Kevin's throat, while he had searched the rest of the house for valuables. Between the two of them, they walked out with around $1,200. Both were charged with capital murder. In February of 2003, Daniel Torres stood trial in the 292nd Judicial District Court of Dallas County in front of Judge Henry M. Wade, Jr. The state's case rested on the DNA found from the different locations in the house. Torres was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. Johnny Cerna was tried later that same year and given the same sentence.
In his closing argument at Daniel Torres' trial, prosecutor George West had told the jury that Kevin's family had already known. Quote, "This bird spoke. He spoke to us. We know this bird will attack anybody who's attacking his owner." And who did he attack? Daniel Torres. Bird had given his life defending his owner and friend that night. Before he died, he'd left the mark that would eventually put his killer in handcuffs.